Use my phone if you want.
So how do I for you to start?
Just okay. All right. So let me just get my things here. All right. So for this hour, we're going to talk about things I think many of us have been talking about throughout the entire conference. We certainly had Hackfest on AI tools for programmers. We've definitely heard John speak about large language models. So now we're looking at machine learning in libraries and how we might build expertise, capacity, and utilization. So let's see, these are working. Very good. So what are we going to do? We have a few things planned. Starts with us. We're not going to talk very long, though. We're going to provide a bit of overview, a bit of background, kind of provide some context for where we are today, what are some of the opportunities right now, and some of those challenges that we're going to face. And then we really want to open this up to you. This is about a conversation about how we as a profession might be able to move forward machine learning if that's where we think we need to be going. How do we do that? So in order to do that, we're going to have some Menti polls. So we will have a Menti URL. I'm hoping that those who are watching at home will also join in. We are trying to be engaging with everybody. I have logged in to the Zoom as well, so I will keep an eye on questions and comments in there that I can share with the room. And I think there might be some Access people also doing that. So if we can keep an eye on that, we would like to keep the engagement both in the room and online. And so we're hoping that in the end, at the by the time 3:15 comes and before the break, we actually have a couple of takeaways to actually do something. And so one of the things I think we'd really like to see if you are interested in moving this kind of thing forward would be something like a community of practice. So what would that look like? Where would that be? Is that a Slack channel? Is that something else? How do we get that going? But that's just one of the ideas. And we really would like to see this move beyond talk, if possible, into some actual action items. It's not a lot of time in an hour to come up with all of those, but I'm hoping we've got some really smart brains in this room that will have something that we could do at the end of this. All right.
You click that?
Yeah.
Pardon. We're good? Okay. Before I start, I should just say, we all know from yesterday that Krista is obsessed with meetings. And so just to let you know, we will finish 10 minutes early so that you can complete your documentation for the session and address any of those outstanding tickets apparently that are piling up since you've been here at the conference. So just to give you a little bit of time. Machine learning today. I guess a couple of things we all know. One is that this is truly, and maybe it's an overused word, but it's a transformational technology. It really is changing the way we think about information, about learning, about how we can ingest this into different aspects of the kind of work we do and the services we provide. So it really has this opportunity to see things in very, very different ways in all sorts of different contexts. It's also pretty troubling. We've seen from generative AI, some of the hallucinations, some of the issues, some of the concerns about environmental issues that around machine learning and AI more generally. So on one hand, we've got a tool that is very powerful. We've also got a tool which has lots of problems with it. So we need to be able to navigate through that in some fashion. And obviously that's some of the discussion we'd like to hear about today. I think the thing from our perspective is that so far the library response to machine learning has been kind of passive. We are concerned about it, we're interested, we're looking around, but we're not necessarily adopting it and testing it and critiquing it, I guess, maybe in the way that other industries and other sectors are doing. So we've taken a little bit of a hands-off approach. Lots of pilot projects, not a lot of scale. projects at this point, although we'll talk about a couple. So I think one of the things that we'd like to see is why is that happening, and how can we move from being a kind of more passive player to being a much more engaged player? And I think we need to be an engaged player for all sorts of reasons. And this is something that came up with John's presentation yesterday. Machine learning is not just generative AI. There are many other aspects of machine learning which are not generative AI, which are very powerful, very useful, and I've been around for a long time. So it really is thinking about machine learning in the broader spectrum, not just about the ChatGPT world and all that sort of technology, but machine learning writ large. There really are opportunities to use this technology in lots of different ways. And I guess I would say that an advantage for us, a huge advantage, I think, is that Canada really is a leader in artificial intelligence and the use of machine learning. We've got some wonderful research groups and sectors that are engaged deeply in this area. And as a result, there's also lots of expertise available within Canada that is maybe more accessible for us than in, say, other jurisdictions. So think about that we really can lean on the AI strategy, the national AI strategy that has really put Canada in the forefront. Just flip that. So opportunities, just very briefly. The very first one, obviously, is the core of any machine learning system is data, and good data, and maybe not Reddit data, which is what OpenAI has been using stunningly. So our situation is very different and very powerful. We've got a lot of open access data. We've got a lot of peer-reviewed data in many cases, a lot of licensed data that allows us to do data mining in various ways. And data, and good data, is really at the heart of this, and it's there for us. So how will we utilize that in the most effective way? The other thing is we do have some emergent projects that are more at scale, which we need to track and certainly participate in and be involved in. One certainly is the emergent CRCan application to CFI, which has a substantial machine learning component to it. And James and maybe Susan can talk about that if you're interested in more details. But that really is an opportunity to do things at a national level and hopefully spin off or at least encourage other applications as well. The other one is something that the Ontario Council of University Libraries is doing, which is to start a task group to look at machine learning applications within academic libraries. And this task group is not going to sort of do an overview of what's going on in machine learning and do a kind of a scan of the environment. Its task really is to look for specific projects that we can implement. It is very much an action-oriented model. And we hope at the end of this process, and it's just emergent now, that we will have specific examples of things that we want to do, and most importantly, a way to do them. One of the ways to do them that we've been thinking about is to develop some sort of a virtual lab, which would allow a virtual machine learning lab, which would allow participation of many people to work with this technology, to do various kinds of projects, and to move forward either small or very large applications. Two last things. One of the good news for us, and we've heard about this yesterday, is that there are certainly more open source options than ever before, and they're relatively good options. There are possibilities to use different kinds of compute environments to make this work. This means we can probably work on smaller models and less powerful compute and actually make a difference, make something valuable. So there are real interesting changes there, which are helpful. And lastly, a kind of a divergent piece, which is when we work with machine learning, it's not just so much building things and creating services and exploring the technology, but also thinking about the policy implications of this technology and how it plays out in our institutions and in our jurisdictions. So I think we need to think about engagement in policy issues around machine learning as well.
All right, so I get to be a bit of a Debbie Downer here. There are lots of challenges when it comes to thinking about AI in libraries. Sorry, just a second here, something popped up in Zoom. So the first is, oh, things are, there we go, sorry. So the first is, of course, we need to have skill building and expertise. And it does take time and effort. John can probably speak to this in his experience of training and building a large language model. But it isn't necessarily something that every library is going to have. Some libraries don't have much in the way of tech support to begin with. So how do we get these libraries involved? How do we build the skills in order to consider how to implement machine learning in libraries? So we do need to build that expertise. Resourcing is always a problem. I mean, resourcing is a problem from a staff point of view. I'm sure many of us are always begging for more people in our departments so we can just do the work that we currently have to do and have looming at us in the future. So how do we do that? But it's also computing resourcing because machine learning can take quite a bit of power. We've heard that. So how do we do that in our environments? It would also require prioritization. If we're going to do this, it needs to be a priority and it needs to have the support of the higher ups in order to give us the time to do the work and to figure out a way to implement machine learning in libraries. So it does require some support in prioritization. And when we prioritize things, something's got to drop off. So what is that? What do we give up? And I think we're very good at coming up with things we want to do and not so good at actually stopping things. So we need to get a little better at that if we're going to take something as big as machine learning on. So the other problem is that vendors are already ahead of us and they're already doing it. Scopus is using AI in their results. We're seeing it all over the place in tools. We're getting requests from faculty for tools. The vendors are already there. They have more money than we do. They have more people than we do. So we're already playing catch up. So if we want to control this and not have to pay for it, how do we catch up to vendors who are already doing it? And how do we have a conversation when somebody says, well, we could just pay for it? What do we lose if we just pay for it? All right. So that's all we're talking about. We're done. It's up to you now. So we do have a Menti poll. So if you have a device, feel free to hop on. We would love to get some engagement and feedback based on these questions. And Mike, are you?
Is that up on the screen, the address?
The address is, we'll just give it a minute so that.
Yeah, take a look at that, make sure people get on. Hopefully that's the right code. These are always interesting times. And then I'll bring up the.
Could we have that thrown in the chat in Zoom? Maybe?
So what we're going to do is lead you through a series of questions on Mentimeter so we can vote on some things. But we also, of course, want to hear from you specifically. So we'll do some polling. We'll get some baseline information as we go along. As we go through each question, we really do want you to engage with those questions and go wherever you want for that matter. If there are other issues that you want to address that aren't here, that's important too. So the questions we're going to go through are really our starting kits for a conversation. But believe me, if you have no questions, it's going to be a very boring hour. So
We'll just sit here.
I've already threatened my table that if they don't, ask lots of questions, they're in trouble later. Okay, people getting on okay? Do I hear? Okay, that's good. So let me bring this up. All right, good. So in case you miss it, the code is at the top there if you haven't seen this already. Let's hope this works. Okay, how important is machine learning to libraries? Let's see what you think. And I guess it might be, if you're interested in talking about this, something that Krista mentioned about priorities and how we navigate those priorities. If, as we appear to be saying, that machine learning is important at a certain level, what does that mean for resourcing? What does that mean for the kinds of priorities or decisions we're going to have to make in our institutions or with our resources to do this kind of work? Because for the most part, we're either not engaged with it or we need to participate in other projects in order to engage with it. So I don't know if people want to comment. Do we have the microphones around for folks, Peter? We could do. So please raise your hand if you want to address this or talk about something related to this. I think there's a corner here.
For a question like this, I think I'd want to clarify, like, is it for libraries to engage in machine learning themselves, or is it for us to see what vendors are doing with it?
Well, the beauty of questions like this is the answer is yes. So how would you like to, how would you see that? How would you see this? Do you think it's different perspective either way?
Well, certainly it's essential for us seeing the output of what comes from machine learning, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be the ones doing it. So.
Yeah, Mike, I'm going to kick in there. We have a long history of building it 50 times across Canada individually, and then stepping back to think, should we really be doing that? So I'm into central integration on this one. CRKN is a good place to start, but there probably will be some individual libraries that want to play in this space, but an awful lot of us we don't have the resources to be building it ourselves. We want to participate.
There is a
What's question one?
John and there's someone.
Okay.
I'll come to you, John, next down.
Okay, it's me. Wow. Okay. If you ever get a chance to read Intelligent Agents, What We Learned at the Library, it's a 1996 article, Nardi and O'Day. It's a fantastic look at, can intelligent agents replace reference? And at the time, they basically said no, but it is a coming. And it's a fascinating look because there's a lot of things that we don't have to do if we know how to use these machine learnings to do some of the work we don't want to do. So the form of stopping is really automating.
And I think Matt in the previous session before lunch was raising some interesting questions about that thinking, which, as you say, is happening with all of us. But, what do you lose and what do you gain?
Yeah, I'm going to try to be succinct. I'm sorry. Obviously, I have a lot to talk about this, but first, I did want to say I'm heartened by the idea of an OCL or other kind of consortial approach, because certainly out of every library in Ontario I can think of, mine might be the only institution where there may be enough infrastructure to do this in-house. We have spent, and here's where I'm going to get strident. We have spent as a profession so long passing off our IT structure to vendors and just getting rid of capacity and getting rid of the ability to do things ourselves that most of us, even if we wanted to do this a lot, couldn't do it. And I want to bring a special attention to David Kemper, who is definitely a party in our IT infrastructure that we're able to even consider doing this at my own institution. That said, if we wanted to do training of especially large language models in particular, it would require resources that I don't have at the moment, which is to say big stacks of GPUs. But one thing that people may not be aware of is that Compute Canada, which is now the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, as librarians, and this still blows my mind, we have first order access to what is the biggest publicly known, I'm sure CSIS or somebody has a bigger one, supercomputer stack in the entire country. Now, it's not trivial to use, but they have gobs and gobs of resources, and as a librarian, you can just get them. It's staggering. Is anyone from digital? I don't suppose anyone from here. Boy, it's really a great service. It really, really is. But I think the way forward is going to have to be some kind of consortial, because as Peter, someone said, I can't remember, doing it 50 times over, even if we could, is perhaps spinning wheels a little bit. So I'd be very interested in seeing a consortial approach to this, at least to hash some ideas out. Thank you.
We've got one over there, but we have a couple of questions that have come through Zoom. So the first one here is, can you provide some examples of where you think that machine learning could have the most transformational impact in libraries? And I'd like to open that up to everybody.
We are going to ask a question later on about where you think those transformations might happen, what areas. So you may want to hold that question if
Sure.
that's okay, and then we can talk about it at that point.
I was thinking what we could do is, what if we lean into an opposition to machine learning, in that we are one of the few institutional places that we could provide an alternative. So there are many criticisms of machine learning, and one of them, I think is probably best described by Cory Doctorow, of this idea like it's a form of techno-feudalism, right? That there's all of a sudden the internet is going away, the commons is being consumed, and it's a black box. And one of the benefits of pursuing the opposite of machine learning is that we provide an alternative that is grounded in values, that is not a hard sell. Like, it's already in privacy. It's already in, it was an essay that I read last week. And I think it was Heather, I want to give credit, so I wrote it down. Heather Ford. And that's important, right? We want to give credit. So and suggests that one of the alternatives to AI is the ability to verify. And I understand that with linked data, you don't want to necessarily say, hey, we're the positive, we're ground truth. But linked data at least provides evidence of, here is a name, it is grounded in documents, it is connected to things. I may not know this thing, but I know this thing, and I can see that there's a pattern. So I would maybe, what if we leaned hard the other way?
So just a comment on that, because I think I don't think we have an either or choice here. I think we can say yes to both those things. When you think about what we might bring to the table with respect to machine learning, it may not be simply doing what everybody else is doing with machine learning. It may be doing something that actually tries to address some of those very questions that you mentioned, Mita. And linked open data might be an important contribution and enabler for that sort of thing. But I don't know that we should say, because it's still early days for this technology, that what we get is all that we're going to get. There may be options, and I'm sure there will be options for us to actually improve this, given the kinds of values and objectives that we have as a sector. So I think it's not an either or. I think it's a yes.
Great questions. I think most or some people in this room know that I teach a class for a certain institution. And the fourth week of that class is a gentlest introduction to machine learning that is possible. The feedback I get from that week, amongst all others, is, why are you teaching us this? This doesn't make any sense. And my lead up to that fourth week is, don't trust any of this farble parble. And some people get it, some people don't, some people are just frustrated with it. So that's sort of the background that I come to this with. So I have this feeling that perhaps we should be honest with what our capacity is. I think a few years back, many years back at this point, remember Evergreen and COA? We were all going to do our own thing. It was going to be great. And Ex Libris ruled us all. So I think our next choice, our next strategy here, we need to be mindful of what we can actually accomplish and how we're going to tell our directors that this is a priority, if in fact it is. Thank you.
Do you want to do the quick? I'll do next question. Go ahead.
Are you going to do the questions on Zoom, or do you want Margaret to do them?
Margaret, if you want to do them, that's great. We do have one.
Do you have one?
Yeah.
Okay. No.
So this one's from Barbara Sobel. Can you provide some examples of where you think that machine learning could have the most transformational impact in libraries?
So could we move to David's? Because I think we did.
And then David Fiander says, machine learning isn't just machines. How will we address, acknowledge, and support the even more invisible labor necessary to support machine learning within libraries?
It's a central question, and it's an important one, in the sense that not only in terms of our own capacity, but in the larger labor requirements for building machine learning systems, some of which are extremely problematic, as we've heard before. Again, I think it's an opportunity, if we want to take it, for us to do things differently that do respect that, and to acknowledge it, and to respond better than maybe has happened in industry so far. I guess that's our choice.
Just a thought. One of the things that concerns me quite a bit is the move to proprietarizing our data. And ultimately that data is metadata, whether it be usage information about who's using the articles produced by our institutions, whether it be more and more analytics about the scholarly landscape and the scholarly process are becoming proprietary. And the firms that do that are making huge amounts of money. Machine learning is dependent on good data, and they've got the good data. It's our data, we generated it, but I'm wondering if part of this process has nothing to do with developing the machine learning tools, but everything to do with how do we address the questions around the metadata that's out there, and how do we potentially get some of it freed up or get it into the open realm, or at least get it into a realm where a wider selection, or even get it standardized so not one company has a monopoly on a particular data set that may be absolutely crucial to our understanding the future of the academic landscape.
Sam.
So I just want to say a couple of things that touches on some things that Peter just said about proprietary data, some things that came out of Zoom about labor, some things that Tim and Mita were saying about kind of values and the question why. And I think going back to Mike's point about engaging and what engaging looks like for us. And one of the things that we tend to do in librarianship is we don't have a kind of holistic understanding about technology in general. And so when new technologies arise, whether it's XML back when I was in library school, or open source ILSs, or linked data, or that we can kind of replicate the examples, then we respond to it. And we respond either to see it as an existential threat, in which case we have to do something about it, or as something that's going to save the profession and finally make the world realize how incredibly indispensable we are. And I think that there are ways to understand technology a little bit more holistically, which will help us situate the questions of labor, the questions of privatization, the questions of value, the questions of exploitation, that might help us, rather than trying to address each individual technology as it comes up individually and in a sort of piecemeal fashion, but be sort of prepared to see things as they're coming up on the horizon and be ready for them. So it's interesting, Mike, that you point out that machine learning technologies have been around for a long time, and LLMs, to a certain extent, and it was sort of a different artificial intelligence model, go back to the 60s. So why, I think we need to understand the kind of political or conjunctural reasons why we're having this conversation at this conference this year. We all know why, but why weren't we having it 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago? And I think it's because we kind of tend to lack this holistic understanding of technology and technological change. And so we kind of react to these things as they come up. So for me, engaging in the way that Mike, I think, is talking about, would be having a kind of, and we wouldn't have a consensus across the profession, we couldn't get that, but at least engaging with some holistic understanding of technology in the widest possible context, so that we're not kind of caught off guard each time.
Sam, can I put you on the spot? Can I ask you, because you think about these things deeply and well, why do you think that's the case? Why have we had this rather conflicted relationship, I guess, with technology for decades?
I don't think it's just us. I mean, okay, so some people will know this about me and some people won't, but the way I look at technology and technological change is through a Marxist lens, which means that technology plays a very specific economic and political role, not only in modernizing and constantly revolutionizing the labor process, but also in nowadays with sort of information and communication technologies, with sort of the reproduction of ideology. And so one of the things from a Marxist perspective that has to happen is that all of the things that are deeply implicated in ideological reproduction, schools, libraries, the media, technology, have to be presented and understood in a way that denies that or oppresses it or obscures it. And so it's not just us. basically everyone within a highly advanced developed capitalist country will tend to see technology in a very piecemeal way, not in this kind of holistic way that changes over time and that has a history and that has political and social consequences.
So at this rate, I have 5 questions. We'll be here till about 6 o'clock, so it shouldn't be a problem. Moving along. But we'll let Stacy have the last word on this question. We're never going to move on.
Let me put up my hand. And I just want to comment and sort of support in some ways what Sam is saying, and also point to, I think the profession as we know it has a long relationship with technology. Although we're talking about AI or machine learning, sorry, I said AI, should have said that. And when we look at the foundational moments of the profession of librarianship in the 19th century, technology was always part of that. And we as a profession were passive in that relationship in a way. And so we also can't talk about this without acknowledging that this is a feminized profession. And although many of those people who are involved, many people in this room are not, female presenting or women, that is part of the relationship with technology, and that women were there not to control the technology or to understand it holistically, but to fit into technological or bureaucratic systems from the beginning. And we continue to carry those relationships with us in the ways that we work in technologies and libraries. So when I was talking about cataloging yesterday, that is very much also a role for women, to be the people operating the typewriters, to be even operating the pen as part of a handwritten catalog system, that was intended for women to do and not to be acknowledged. It's not by accident to be not acknowledged as the people involved in creating those records. That's part of being locked into that system. So I think when we want to talk about why are we in this situation, it isn't 10 years ago, it isn't even 20 years ago, it is more than 100 years ago. And to sort of and we are not, I don't think necessarily that isn't something we know when we come through, well, now that I'm teaching in a library school program, but we are not necessarily taught those things, to look at that and examine that. So when we go through these questions, we do have to contend with that history as well, and to think about what that means from a labor perspective.
So there are 2 more comments online. Did you want me to read those?
I think we're going to move on for a little bit right now. If you can hold those, though, we'll come back if we can. Otherwise, we really will be here till 6 o'clock. So this is a bit more specific, I guess. Where do you think this particular technology is going to have its most beneficial effect? So it's more of a pragmatic kind of question. I think you get 2 choices if I remember correctly. And I think when you look at this, we're not talking about specific applications. We're really talking about general areas where we see some advantage, I guess. And certainly with things like ChatGPT, you can see productivity tools coming to the line, and we're seeing it here. So it's an interesting split so far between, as I say, productivity tools, things that will make life easier in lots of different ways in terms of data transfer or what have you, and making discovery tools and accessible tools open. One of the things that we've talked about a lot with machine learning is it really does change the paradigm of what we're trying to do. So we talked a lot about searching today. Machine learning is not about searching; it's about learning, and learning is a information paradigm, I guess, that we may have to start thinking of what that means. Okay, this is good. I really, this is just an example of, I think, where we might apply this technology. I want to go on to maybe the next question, which is in terms of limitations. What limitations do libraries face in adopting machine learning? And I want you to rank these. And I realize that, money is going to come out on top and things like that, but let's just see what happens with this. And there may be other limitations that we want to talk about as a group as well. always interesting to see how these things develop. Money's winning. Yeah, we should have been betting on this. That's right. We could have raised some money from the conference.
When expertise got ahead of money. For a moment.
It's also interesting to see how machine learning experience is not as much of a limitation as expertise, obviously. Okay, we're getting pretty close to having people here. I mean, clearly money obviously is obvious. We might want to talk a little bit about machine learning expertise though, because why, and it maybe goes back to something that John and Sam were talking about and others. Why is it that it's a limitation? To put it differently, what happened that we didn't acquire this kind of expertise when we live in a country where there really is a central focus on this kind of technology and wonderful research groups that are developing graduate students at all levels with this sort of expertise? What happened, if I can put it that way, to us that we didn't engage with this earlier? Now we find ourselves in a deficit position. I guess the other thing that comes up is our issues around priority, obviously, in terms of staff time. I don't know if you wanted to comment on some of these from your perspective.
So, I mean, the biggest problem is that there's always a lot going on, right? So with staff, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how to give my staff time to learn Angular so that they can support the front end of DSpace 7. And that's something that we know we have to support. So how do I also give them time to build that expertise, right? And this is why we're looking at things like the dev day. Like, so if you do have interest, maybe you can take that time and you can work on building that skill. But as a manager, I need to make sure that I'm finding a way to make learning a priority, to get the staffing resources, to get the expertise. So it's a bunch of moving balls, and it's not always an easy juggle. We've got like 3 questions over on that side for sure.
Yeah, well, speaking of Angular, I know that pain very well. So yes, I think taking the time to learn is really important. But I will probably unfortunately build off of that point that Stacey was making earlier, and that because it's a feminized profession, like from my own personal experience, I was like, I'm not a math kid, and I'm not good at math. I'm not good at this. So, you kind of, it's almost like a learned helplessness in when certain labor is feminized, and then you feel like, oh, why should I learn this? And then there's also the time portion as well, where everything feels like a priority in libraries. And I think, Krista, something that I really took from your presentation yesterday was that you're taking the time to prioritize and frankly project manage, which is sometimes a not so nice word to use in libraries. But it's really important actually. So allowing the space and the time in people's brains to be able to do that, and also in creating an environment that is inclusive to that kind of learning, especially for folks who may have been marginalized. And I'm not just talking about women, but also people of color, queer people like myself, so it's like it's a whole bunch of layers. And I think, again, speaking of that passivity, that's probably why we haven't engaged in that learning, right? But I want to. So anyways.
So I'm going to move away from the personal, I suppose, because I feel like one of the main issues that I find when we talk about this is that it seems like a lot of us don't actually know what machine learning is. So there is a difference, right, between a system like ChatGPT and machine learning, where machine learning, like, yes, ChatGPT is based on an algorithm that is constantly updating and learning from itself.
But when I think of machine learning, I'm thinking of programs that like OCR or metadata generation, in which there are open source softwares available. Like for OCR, there is Tesseract, and it's not as good as some proprietary softwares because I've received the joy of having free access to a proprietary software, and wow, amazing. But it's not, I think that we've kind of hide behind this thought that it's too hard or it's going to take too much time, when really it's a matter of we have the control over running a program. We don't need to learn React or any of the coding languages to be able to utilize and to use an interface that helps the computer or the OCR software learn how to identify the optical character. And it doesn't, like, the front end for a system that might generate metadata, you can go in and you can change it and help the machine learn. And so I feel like when we talk about the limitations, it's often because, I don't know, I feel like we just kind of hesitate in thinking that we can do this when really the opportunities are out there for free often, and it's not as scary as learning a whole coding language necessarily.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Krista, for this really important conversation. So I'm just going to cover a little bit of what CRKN is doing right now, actually, with machine learning, and I'll talk a little bit about the CFI project as well. And then maybe I'll just end on an invitation that I hope isn't inappropriate from a CRKN perspective. So we are using machine learning as we speak. We're using the open source tool Transcribus. That is it's a transcription tool, like an OCR tool, but it does intelligent character recognition. It's developed by a co-op called read.coop, if you find them online. We're working on a pilot project to transcribe handwritten texts that are in the Canadiana collections, specifically some of the RG10 papers that we have, so that their full text will be available to researchers and so on. So we're using this technology now, and we're sort of investing some of our own time and our own learning into understanding what the work looks like, what the cost looks like, because it's not free for sure. Also what the labor looks like, because there is some technically and otherwise. And so we're just kind of working through that now, and I'm happy to talk about that anytime. I'm not actually the expert on that particular program. If you folks know Jason Friedman, he's the one to talk to on that in particular. And we are also developing a CFI IF or Innovation Fund application that we'll be submitting sometime in 2024. We have folks who have been intimately involved in that in the audience here today, including Susan Brown and Stacy, wherever you are on the other side of the room. And part of that is we're really looking at ways to take the Canadiana collections, which to date is really like a reproduction of a microfilm film viewer on a website, and sort of turning that on its head and saying, like, this is data in the back, right? Is sort of turning back to this question of the data. Like it's 142 terabytes of extremely interesting, problematic Canadian colonial history that is available there and only accessible in really limited ways at this point. And we want to get ahead of these other folks who are slurping up data and doing interesting and problematic things with that. So part of the CFI application, as ill drafted as it is so far, is developing some sort of expertise within CRKN to address that. And that's looking at sort of AI ethicists, developing our own internal programming expertise and so on. But also, I think, developing a community of practice for librarians, but also the researchers that we want to use this. I should also note we're working just in preliminary fashion right now with other infrastructure providers in Canada in this space. So Coalition Publica, of course, so PKP and Area D, Scholars Portal, and Link, Susan Brown's program, to kind of align our own sort of long-term vision around some of these questions, but more importantly, to align our vision with the funders who support the work. So all that to say, we're invested in this and we're working on it now. I hear the question about whether this could be a consortial approach. And the invitation is like we're a member organization and you are the members. And if you tell us that you want to see something that we can do, that we can help convene, we are more than happy to help facilitate that, as I think the other infrastructure partners would be, because we need to get ahead of this at some point.
Good opportunity to ask this question. Who should we be partnering with? That's right. See how skillfully we did that, James? I thought that was really good. Yeah. I'll take the free beer later from you. Yeah, I realized Compute Canada, Compute Ontario was a bit of a mistake. So think of that as Compute Ontario.
Compute Canada doesn't hear, oh, Compute Ontario. Yeah, yeah.
Anybody want to talk about what the difference is between library vendors and AI companies? And why they're scored a little bit differently? And maybe they're the same? Is OpenAI the new library vendor? Nobody apparently wants to put that. Moving on. Okay.
Dana says, James, thanks for talking about the ethics related to the content and data steward in relation to AI and ML. And libraries need to think about this, whether we are building the tools or the vendors are.
Question here, I think.
I didn't see one that I would like to see on there, which are some of the institutes that are free or nonprofit orgs. So a good one would be the Allen Institute for AI. We were working with them on a assessment software. We wanted to automate some of the features. And I would encourage looking at these as the partners for libraries.
It's interesting. We refer to library vendors. We don't talk about the publishers. Often we see them as the same thing, but there is particularly in scholarly publishing, there is a publishing landscape out there and infrastructure. And we do have more drag than perhaps we think in setting the standards for how that infrastructure works, what metadata it collects, what metadata it releases, and what AI is used for, things like the search interfaces from Science Direct, Web of Science, Scopus, what have you. So I definitely make a distinction between the publishers and, software vendors, what have you, because the publishers really are setting, what does the scholarly, research landscape look like, and what information is collected, what information do authors have to provide when they submit articles, where does that information go? And all of that leads into, technology being used. I would like to know, and I can't know a whole lot more about, what artificial intelligence methods ResearchGate is using to crowdsource their collection of information. And they're not even a publisher or a vendor, but still a significant participant in the scholarly research landscape.
One of the things I find encouraging from this response is the focus on faculty and grad students. I think that's a huge opportunity for us and largely unexplored and maybe even uninvited, although there were some really good examples of this in some other presentations. But that's a great resource we have, and probably a resource that is keen to get experience. I'm thinking particularly of grad students, but also faculty who are keen to have problems that need solving, problems that are large scale, the ones that we can present to them. So I think we need to find a way to marshal that resource and to and open the door for that resource to come in and participate with us. But yeah, sorry.
Yes, thank you.
Lights are blinding up here.
My question is just, what does it mean to adopt a technology, I guess? Like, what does it mean if a library was supporting, say, the storage of a model, or, I'm thinking here about like Transcribus. You can create your own models, but you can't export them out of Transcribus. And what about being a store for like those models, even if the library doesn't itself do the work, say? Or would a library be adopting machine learning even if none of the systems use or explicitly sort of engage with machine learning? Would that still be considered adoption, or is that sort of like an open question of, are libraries teaching machine learning or teaching the ethics of machine learning, or are they doing the training itself?
I mean, I think you can do a multi-prong approach, right? I don't think it has to be one or the other. And I think there is a role for libraries to be involved in those conversations about ethics. Maybe you're working with grad students to do a workshop, so there's a teaching element, but you may have programmers who are also looking at using the tools. And is using the tools adoption? In some ways it is, right? So I don't think it has to be one or the other, but I think we're going to find a mix based on the needs of both the libraries and our communities.
There's a question here, I think. Yeah.
I think a couple of years ago, we would have been talking about like Twitter being source of streaming data that is perfectly usable for training models with a large amount of data, and also a great resource for the API that was very accessible at the time. Now we don't really have an equivalent to that, and like one thing I'd really like to see, libraries and institutions like universities get into is hosting the alternative platforms, hosting Mastodon or something else, so that we have access to both a means of information dissemination from faculty members and also access to that streaming sort of data, so that we can learn how to use these technologies. And I guess in some ways, I kind of see the conversation around machine learning as being a distraction from that, which was almost a hot topic a year ago, and then we started focusing on ChatGPT instead.
I'm going to ask one more question, which is a little bit maybe facetious, and then I want to turn it back over to Krista, because one of the things we said at the very beginning was we need some action plans, and we want to come up with at least 2 or 3 things we can do.
2 might be pushing it.
But we got about 8 minutes. Okay, so let me just ask this question first. What are machine learning going to be for us? What's the role that they will play for us? John got in right away. I've actually asked this question of a fair number of people so far, in a variety of different contexts. And the results are very similar. And the observation I would make to you is that the most obvious things here are machine learning systems as guides and machine learning systems as partners. Those are two very different things. If you're a guide, if it's a guide, it's someone or something that's with you, or showing you the way, pointing in certain directions. You're still responsible. You're the one doing the work. You've got this assistant, if you will. Partners are all in. They're co-explorers. They're co-workers in that sense. Both guides and partners are helpful and useful, and systems can be that. But partners takes it to a different level. A relationship, perhaps, rather than just a service. And then, of course, there's overlords too.
All right, so the question is next steps. I feel like we've only just scratched the very tip of this discussion, and I think there are a lot of strong opinions and really good points, and I think that having a place to continue some of these discussions will be wonderful. The question is, what is that going to look like? And I don't have an answer. I am seriously looking for suggestions. I know we've got the Access Slack channel, which we could always leverage that, bring that back to life. But I also realize people are kind of Slack, Teams, Zoom to past extent. So I'm open to other options, but what would be the best way to keep these conversations going? Yeah, Tim. No, we got one coming.
Great question. And I think back to every August when I apply for the Carl Practicing Librarian grant and never get it. If it's important, the admin in this room should talk to the rest of their teams, put a pool of money together and say, here's up to 10 grand, you librarians ask for it and get something to show after you spend that money. That's how you make something happen. Our well-intentions will be overrun as soon as we get back to our offices and start looking at emails.
It's a fair point.
What strikes me, and we've talked about this already, we've attempted to form two technology agencies that are fairly intimately used by libraries in this country. And one of them is the Alliance, and the other is CRKN. And I know that certain people struggle with a wide group of stakeholders, from scientists to librarians involved in the Alliance. But I would really want to see an AI effort as a partnership. And I think we've got a real opportunity to, rather than building it again.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts on an actual actionable next step that folks in this room could take? Oh, I see a hand over there. Priscilla?
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot about a topic that I'm only mildly familiar, which is a bit funny. But at York we do a little reading group actually. Stephanie and I are part of that. And we do it on accessibility topics. So we pick a topic or a reading that we're all interested in and ask kind of reflective questions on it and do what you do, Krista, which is make time in our schedule to talk about it. Because otherwise we don't talk about it. So that has been a very kind of real way of getting kind of knowledge in and work in a meaningful way. And it's kind of and at the end, something that we like to do is say, what's one thing that we can commit to moving forward?
Yeah.
And so maybe that can be applied here and someone can organize something casual here that we can all kind of commit to as a group.
That would be the ideal thing that I'd like to see come out of this. And we do similar things at Waterloo. We had Mike actually come in and give a similar presentation to the entire library. And now we have a Teams where we basically created a community of practice, and we're sharing readings there, but you actually have had to read the reading in order to share it there, and then share some of the insights that you got from it. So it is kind of like that, like a brown bag or a journal club kind of approach, which could be done as a group. Again, like if we did a Slack channel, we could do similar kinds of things, but I realize it's not always the best medium. But when you're dealing with across Canada, because I'd rather see us do this as a group rather than reinvent the wheel 50 times, right? Like we're very good at that, and I think avoiding that would be good. And I thought I saw a hand. Yeah.
Yeah, I have stuff to say. So it strikes me that one player that seems obvious in this conversation is Carl. I don't know what the advancing research group at Carl is focusing on right now, but I would think that machine learning would be a pretty important candidate topic for them. When I think about what we were able to do with Portage, I can imagine that machine learning might be the next really serious topic that we want to tackle. And it's not just about the tools and if we're going to build the tools and how we're going to use them. It has a lot to do with our collections, whether they're accessible for machine learning, how we can facilitate that for our researchers. And so I think I completely agree that some nationally coordinated efforts would probably be an effective way to move things forward. The CRK and CFI project is, to me, an absolutely obvious, like I assume that machine learning will be in that proposal in a very prominent way. And so that's an opportunity for us to work with faculty as well as have libraries from across the nation involved in something that is funded from an external partner. And, you know, one of the reasons I'm pointing to groups like Carl and CRKN is that they're also quite effective in terms of talking to the Alliance. So it's quite hard for us as individuals to talk to the Alliance. Even our institutions have a hard time doing that. But these large national organizations can help to broker a partnership with the Alliance and help to get us funding and access to computer infrastructure and other things that we would need in this area. So I think that doing things at your own institution and learning as much as you can is a very useful way to go. I think reading groups and you know, experiments, and we're doing teaching in this area too. But I really think a kind of nationally coordinated effort is likely to have the most impact. And if we get something like a CFI grant, then that kind of keeps us honest, because you have to do the work once you take that money. So you will do the work. And there's opportunity for lots of people to be part of that work, I think, as well.
And I
This is a super important topic, but if we're going to let these people go home when we promised to let them go home, we're going to have to wrap it up. So just to maybe last comment.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think we've run out of time. So at this point, maybe we continue trying to figure out, you know, a national conversation through something like Slack for the moment. But I think, like Lisa said, you know, having some of those larger groups kind of lead the way in some projects and actually build that expertise along with faculty, I think is going to be an important part of that. So some of those ideas might come from the conversations that we're having, so we can go for those grants in the future. And that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.